Okay, there's humans. We're not like little boxes. Good to see you. Good. I gotta get going.
Yeah, what am I gonna do? How do I do this? So, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, I know I owe you a call. In fact, it was on my list. Monday I have this set aside. I want to get this
That's
going.
funny. That's so funny. Because the one picture that he sent, I couldn't see. I thought it was. I just texted him.
The board.
I didn't realize he had actually counting you with it. If I would have looked at it, I would have.
Good, how are you? We're saying the same thing. I mean, ours is a formality. We have the money. We know
That way I can. Okay.
So I'll make sure
No problem.
we'll take yours.
Just look up and
Our
see
timing
what
might
you
be a little screwy. You guys might go to the board before it goes to council, but that's not a problem.
Probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're working on all that stuff.
But good, I'm excited about it. And I don't even know if, hi, we're here. I don't even know. Jody chimed in. Yeah, ditto for us. And we don't have to have those details worked out. You know, we'll speak in more generalities about like it's just advancing next phase. Stay behind the line. Yeah. No.
Are you ready, Pat?
Yes.
Yep. Right. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining here in the boardroom and on WebEx. Appreciate called meeting to order of our April 1st Valley Metro RPTA Valley Metro Rail meeting. I will have Pat do a roll call.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. City of Avondale Vice Mayor Veronica Malone. City of Buckeye Councilmember Clay Goodman.
Present.
Okay. City of Chandler Mayor Kevin Hartke.
Here.
City of El Mirage Vice Mayor Monica Dorsey.
Present.
Town of Fountain Hills Councilmember Mike Sharnow.
Present.
Town of Gilbert Mayor Bridget Peterson. City of Glendale Councilmember Lauren Tomlichuk.
Present.
City of Goodyear Councilmember Bill Stipp.
Present.
Maricopa County Supervisor Jack Sellers.
Here.
City of Mesa Councilmember Francisco Heredia.
Here.
City of Peoria Councilmember John Edwards. City of Phoenix Vice Mayor Laura Pastor.
Here, present.
Town of Queen Creek Vice Mayor Jeff Brown.
I'm here.
City of Scottsdale Councilmember Betty Janik. Or Councilmember Tom Durham for City of Scottsdale. City of Surprise Councilmember Chris Judd.
Present.
City of Tempe Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage. City of Tolleson Councilmember Adolfo Gomez. Town of Wickenburg, Mayor Rui Pereira. He's on the WebEx. And Town of Youngtown, Mayor Michael Lavault.
Yes, Pat, I'm here.
Thank you. We can proceed.
Perfect. Thank you, Pat. All right, just a quick, again, because we have a hybrid here, if folks have a question on the WebEx, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. Or there's a little function there, a raise hand function that we will call you there. And make sure you mute your microphone or your phone if you're online. First item on the agenda is public comment. The public will provide it with the opportunity at this time to address the committees on non-agenda items and all agenda items. Folks will have up to 3 minutes per speaker. And I'll call first Mr. Marvin Lofton. Mr. Lofton,
Yes,
you have 3 minutes.
good morning. I was here a month ago to explain to you my concerns about no-shows, drivers not wearing masks, drivers allowing passengers not to wear masks, which my understanding is when that happens, it's breaking the law. I've reported every incident since middle of December, and I've recorded that in my phone system here at Valley Metro. Whether that information gets to your contractors or not, I don't know, but I have a feeling it doesn't. That's upsetting. No shows went from 21 to 24. No mask drivers went from 41 to 67. Passengers went from 60 to 160. And that's just on 3 routes, 7th Street, 44th Street, and Bell Road, because those are my main ways to get back and forth. I am your end user. You're here because of me. You're a service. You provide a service for this valley. And I expect to be treated as such. I need to talk to somebody today to get some resolve as far as moving forward. I am not happy with the fact that the chairman stopped me at my last presentation and said someone will contact me, and here I am a month later before you again. I would like to know what's going to happen with these contractors. Are they going to be renewed, or whatever procedures you have to take to get that done? I was kind of happy that the extension went to May 3rd, but the federal judge decided that the country could do without masks. I'm glad that the DOJ is looking to appeal that because she stepped out of her jurisdiction in Florida to make that a mandate across the country. I think you all know about that. But I need to talk to someone today, somewhere. Phone calls don't do it, obviously. And letters take too long. And Zoom is out of the question as well. If that can happen, I'd be very, very happy to get some resolve moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lofton, and if we can get staff to respond to any questions, comments that he had, so that'll be perfect. Thank you, Mr. Lofton. Next person, Mr. Blue Crowley. Blue, you have 3 minutes.
I haven't started yet. I haven't started yet and the clock is going. Could you have it go to 0 and when I start talking, start the clock?
Go ahead, Lou. Okay, Blue, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, now the
There
clock,
you
all right. Public comment is important to me. And what you're doing at all your meetings is also important to me. And I was going to be commenting on your special meeting where you took the public comment out, all the activities I've had trying to find out why. All I get is the board and the attorney. It isn't the open meeting law that governs that, but we will go into that at another time and place. But part of the reasons that I wanted to speak at that time were to ask, who was your master going to be? Is it the rail or the bus, or are you being multimodal? Because since Mr. Smith has been here, I'd like you to guys look at the bug. They're on your agendas. And look at the one from 17 where transit was listed first. I had pointed this out before that these were important things that needed to be dealt with and addressed. Also with the multimodal, I know you guys aren't rail, but you were the ones that were asked to okay the alignment for the extension going to the Capitol. And if you look at it, not one of the circles where it said we need to get things done is over the bus routes that pass through it. So from your new circle that you're doing, you've got 4 bus routes going to 19th Avenue, and if you want, you can include 43rd Avenue, that have no connectivity with the bus. How is that being multimodal? How are you doing the job correctly? Now, I understand when rail is doing things for rail, they want to make it as easy for them as possible. And why would they want to have 4 stops between 7th Avenue and 19th Avenue? Oh, because there's a bus going through there, and if you're being multimodal, you do and develop it that way. But you guys have done what? Well, this is from 21 that you okayed and agreed to that. And at that time, I pointed it out to you. What have you done to fix that problem? With both of the agencies doing what they're supposed to be doing, I would have spoke at that last special meeting. The 3 minutes, say things about that, and on the transition. But I still don't know why or who, because when I've talked to members of the board, all they say is that was between you and the attorney. So why don't you want the public to be speaking? It's a part of a federal reg that you guys have agreed to, that is a part of your agreement with MAG to do things according to Hoyle. And the last time you had to do the meeting all over. Now, I will be getting in touch with Dee Dee Barker, who does have the numbers, and I'll get them to the attorney. And then you guys can play from there, because I am filing against you for not doing it according to the way it should be.
Thank you, Blue. Next item on the agenda, we have Chief Executive Officer's report and a call on CEO, first report of her tenure. Jessica Mefford Miller, provide us the report.
Good morning, directors, team, and guests. I'm so pleased to be here for my first official board meeting as Valley Metro CEO. I'd like to give you an update on what staff and I have been doing over the last 2.5 weeks. We began together by having an all-hands meeting on Tuesday, April 5th, with the entire team, and I'm taking the time to get to know you as well as our team here. I have found a team that is engaged and that is passionate about serving our customers each day. We're working together to develop and execute a vision for becoming more customer focused, and that includes focusing on the experience of our riders, as well as deepening our relationships with you, our board, and all of our member cities. So we've got a number of meetings scheduled across the coming weeks and months with you and the cities that you each represent. We're also focused on creating a Phoenix, and that includes through the service we provide each day, but as well as making deeper connections between the transit system, our communities, and our local businesses. We're also focused on sustainability. That includes financial sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social equity. The team is on fire and ready to move forward, and I'm so excited to be here. Yesterday, we met with our Allied Universal team. This was led by Adrienne Ruiz. Adrienne is our Director of Safety, Security, and Quality Assurance. She's also our federally designated Chief Safety Officer, by the way. This was our first all-hands meeting with Allied since the beginning of the pandemic. This was a great opportunity to bring our entire Allied team and Adrienne's leadership team in the same room to talk about our goals, our challenges, and the opportunities ahead. We were able to do this because our local law enforcement partners were providing security across the system so that we can spend a couple of hours here yesterday. We shared updates with them. We talked about some of the challenges like reducing security officer assaults, as well as hiring new team members within the Allied contract. It's a good group. They're doing a good job out there for us every day. I have been pleasantly surprised by the level of kindness and engagement that our security officers have out there on the system, on the trains, and at the stations. We certainly have work to do, but we have a strong foundation and we'll build from that. Earlier this week also, we took a ride and did a meet and greet with Congressman Gallego, members of the City of Phoenix staff, and local council members to talk about how we could better connect light rail to our neighborhoods, including and especially our local businesses, mitigating the impact of some of our construction activities on our customers and businesses, and then talking about all important potential funding opportunities in ways that Valley Metro is or will be seeking federal funding, including additional funds for the Northwest Extension Phase 2, the South Central Extension, and federal funding that would help us begin to shift our fleet toward carbon neutral vehicles. We've got upcoming meetings with City of Phoenix staff to continue these very items. You're all probably aware that we began single tracking in the downtown area this past Saturday. This is part of the South Central Extension. We also celebrated with our partners in the city last week the groundbreaking of the Downtown Hub project. And we've got a pretty robust campaign called Pardon Our Progress, where our community customer experience coordinators and staff are out there trying to assist our customers as we're moving through this construction period. It can be disruptive, it's loud, it's noisy, and we're operating on a single track schedule, which is different than our normal schedule. I can tell you from Saturday, from the beginning until today, we've improved our schedule tremendously, and the delays are diminishing. And that's because of the hard work and the coordination between our operations team, our construction team, and our communications team. So well done to the team. We will keep up the good work. We'll continue to make progress, but really focus on that customer experience. You have a ridership report in front of you. I want to give you just a few highlights about things we should be thinking of and what we might expect from our system ridership in the months ahead. In recent months, we've really seen our rail ridership begin to rebound as special events return to the downtown area and surrounding environment, as people are returning to more in-person work. So you're noticing a big jump in month over month relative to last year. We expect that trend to continue, especially if the Suns stay in the playoff. It's been a huge boost to ridership, and kudos for staff for being out there and supporting our customers during all of these events. Bus ridership has been a little bit slower to return, but I want us all to be aware that our bus system is the workhorse of the system. It's the reach. It serves most of our communities. Last month, our bus system carried over 70% of our fixed route customers. So we are still, even as we recover, carrying more than double the bus customers as we do rail customers every day. We expect bus ridership to continue to grow in the coming months. And our hope is that when the fall schedule resumes and people come into a more regular work schedule, more normal school schedules, we're going to see that bus ridership become strong again. Another important part of our service delivery is our van pool program. And as our customers are experiencing pain at the pump and returning to in-person work, we're seeing growth in our van pools. We have 7 vans that have returned to service already in the month of April. That gives us 201 vans out there providing service. We've done a lot of promotion and have received some positive press lately as a viable alternative to traffic congestion and pain at the pump. So I also look forward to recovery within our van pool program. And finally, April's a beautiful month in Phoenix. I'm so glad to have arrived this time of year. This is Valley Bike Month. So our communications team has a number of programs going on. They actually produced this lovely artwork that you see to promote biking and using transit in conjunction with one another. I think it's a fantastic program. Yesterday was Bike to Work Day. Tomorrow, by the way, is Earth Day. And so we've got a lot of programming and activities. And as we emerge, I expect this to be an even bigger event looking forward next year. You can find out more about this at sharetheride.com. Okay, finally, quick look ahead. We're going to have pretty active agendas for our May committee and board meetings, as well as June. We're marching through our budget process and hope to have that budget approved before the end of the fiscal year on June 30th. So you have the schedule here, and we'll have more discussions in the near future about agendas for those meetings. Thank you, directors.
Perfect. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. Move on to item number 3, Audit and Finance Subcommittee update. We'll have Councilmember Stipp provide this update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. We had a very long meeting discussing the budget, but we did talk about some other audit things actually before we dove into that. We had reviewed the travel expense audit. The audit team brought that forward. We approved that. No significant findings. I think if we look back over time, we'll see that the travel concerns that we've had over the years have finally kind of been solidified and brought into some really good control. Staff has done a really good job of working through the various policies that have been put in place in order for us to achieve that level of success. The other was the credit card transactions audit. We approved that as well. Again, no significant findings in that report. Those have both been posted on the Valley Metro website. We had the update from the internal auditor to achieve, and she has been working with each of us to try to formulate the audit plan going forward for the next fiscal year. And then finally, we had a very detailed discussion going forward on the operating and capital budget. You'll see a different format in your budget, in your packet for today's meeting. That was a result of the conversation that we had last 2 weeks ago. We're trying to invent something new, and as I said at that meeting, we're trying to build it like as we fly it. So parts are flying off, but parts are getting attached. So it's a heavy lift for the staff because it's something completely different. And we really want to applaud their efforts in trying to bring something different to us. And with change comes pain, and we certainly suffered through some of that at the last meeting. Our plan going forward is we had talked about the Valley Metro recommendations last month. At the month of May, Audit and Finance Subcommittee meeting will be the inflationary assumptions that were made. And then finally, the overall budget we'll look at in early June. It certainly drags out the process, but we want to assure you as the Audit and Finance Subcommittee that we have done our due diligence so that by the time you get the budget, it's been pretty well vetted. And in that light, we are encouraging every board member as you look through the budget information to get your questions into the staff as quickly and as soon as possible so that they can compile them, and then compiled answers will then come out to the board and then will be updated regularly so that I may ask a question that the chair had not considered and vice versa. We want to get those questions and answers to everybody on the board. So by the time you look at it in June for final adoption, you pretty much should have all your questions answered. And with that pending question, that ends my report.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember. Any questions, comments? All right. Hearing none, we'll move on. Item number 4, consent agenda. And just to note, consent agenda item 4B is being pulled from consideration today and will be brought back to a future meeting for consideration. So we can answer some of the questions here. Ask the committee if they have any questions. Request a motion and a second to approve minutes from March 17th and March 24th.
So move.
Mayor Harkey,
Second.
Councilwoman Tamacha. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Please.
Aye.
Hearing none, motion passes. Item number 5, we have the 2022 cost of living adjustment, and I'll have Jessica Medford-Miller provide that up, introduce this item.
Good morning again, directors. I'm going to ask Jim Hilliard to come to the podium and address the proposed cost of living for Valley Metro staff. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. So as we've shared in a number of recent board meetings, Valley Metro continues to be impacted by the rapid changes that we're all seeing in the nation's labor market. I think over the last several months, we've seen an uptick in our turnover rate from about 14% in the previous years to 20% over the last 4 months. We've shared with you a number of particular classifications in our operations area where we're concerned that vacancy rates are on the verge of beginning to impact our ability to put out service. In your memo, for example, we note that our LRV inspector classification is down 44%. Our electromechanical classification is down 40%. Our communication systems techs are down 40%, et cetera. So we know that this is really a reflection of the rapid changes in the labor market that everyone is seeing. I think the most recent BLS data for the Phoenix metro area shows that there was an 11% rate of inflation over the trailing 12 months. Their survey of employers for the year ending in December found that employers across the both public and private sectors were reporting about a 5% increase in labor costs over the course of the year. And so we know that until we address those increases for our staff members, that we're going to continue to be at a disadvantage in hiring and retaining key folks. Now, the fact that we've talked most about our operations positions, I think is important because those are the ones that I think are nearest to impacting our service levels. But it's important to recognize that behind those folks are a whole team that support them and enable them to be effective. So for example, the people who are charged with recruiting and hiring the folks to fill these LRV inspector and electrical mechanical positions is a 3-person team in our HR department. And 2 of those 3 folks have been vacant in the last 2 months. So of course, we're at a disadvantage in addressing these vacancies until we can be more competitive across the spectrum, both for operations and for the support positions that they rely on. So because of that, Valley Metro is seeking your consent to implement, starting at the end of this month, 5% COLA for Valley Metro staff. This increase is essentially the same increase that MAG approved for its staff a couple weeks ago, and that several other cities in the region have already approved this year. We did a survey of cities in the region and found that essentially everyone is facing these same issues and looking to make these changes either this year or early on the next fiscal year. We think it's important to act as quickly as possible to address this because really this is a pay me now or pay me later situation. So if we don't help show our staff that we understand the impact that inflation is having on them, and we will continue to fail to retain key positions. So if those positions are hourly, then we're going to pay overtime to fill those shifts until we can fill them. Once we do fill them, we know based on BLS data that we're certainly going to fill them at a rate that's at least 5% greater than the folks we hired last year. So this 5% COLA we think is the most fiscally responsible thing that we can do to allow us to keep the key staff members that we know our customers depend on to get service out. The cost in FY 2022 is about $275,000 because it would really just be for the last 2 months of this fiscal year. We don't need an adjustment in our budget to do that. We have bucket loads of vacancy savings on all these vacant positions because agency-wide 1 in 5 positions is vacant right now in order to fund that change. We bring it to the board today because we want to make sure the board both consents to this change and then frankly understands that it has a ripple effect into the 23 budget, which is also before you. The impact in FY 2023 is about $1.6 million as we annualize that change across the year. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Board members have questions?
I do.
Councilwoman
Thank you, Mr.
Tomacek.
Chair. I have a question, and I understand we're in a very unusual labor market, and I think we're seeing the beginning of maybe a pivot in what it's going to take to recruit and retain talent. So I understand the pay is a big part of it, but I'm not sure where we are as an organization as far as what type of flexibility and hybrid schedules, and because that's just almost maybe even to a lot of people more important than pay. So if I don't have a problem with moving forward with this, but I want to make sure we're looking at this holistically and we're addressing all of the issues in problems in recruiting and retaining talent.
Thank you so much for that point, Councilmember Tomacek. We couldn't agree more. So, there's really sort of two components to that for Valley Metro. One is on our operations side, and unfortunately, hybrid work obviously for electromechanics isn't a thing.
Right.
But to their credit, what the operations team did implement just a few weeks ago were 410 schedules. So we know that having to work 3 shifts and being relied upon to get service in, day in and day out, creates a lot of tension with people's families. And so by moving to 410s, we're hoping to allow folks to have a little better work-life balance than in the current, the old kind of 5/8 schedule. Sort of on the support services side, I think we recognize that, as you say, the labor market's changed. That the question of, are we going to all continue to work remote all the time, or are we all going to come back into the office all the time? That's not the right question. The question is, we know we live in a hybrid workforce. We know we now live in a hybrid world, and how do we create an agency that collaborates and is cohesive and serves its customers with excellence in that in that new reality? And so, in fact, Jessica will be talking with our managers next week and posing that exact question to them about how we, continue to take the good of a hybrid workforce, but don't lose the collaboration, the cohesiveness that I think people need in being a part of a dynamic team.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if I could just, and this is a little bit off topic, but kind of, I know the AFS has been, for the last couple of years, actually been asking to address the amount of lease space in this building, real high rent district down here. Because I know the lease expires with Prop 400, but we still have plenty of time to figure out what our needs are going to be moving forward. So I think, and it's not going to be something we can figure out overnight. It's going to take some time to get there. But I'm glad to see that we're moving in that direction, because I think you need to offer flexible work schedules for people in order to really to make them be committed to the organization. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Supervisor.
And just a comment, Maricopa, that Maricopa County's already done a 5% increase. We have a 19% turnover rate, but part of the issue that we're dealing with currently in the county attorney's office is we have a 20% vacancy rate in that office. And that's a big problem for us.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yes, Vice Mayor Petroff.
You had stated that it was shared vacancies or shared savings from vacancies. I'm sure I'm not saying the right term, but we have vacancy savings. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, understood.
We have vacancy savings. My question is, vacancy savings is a one-time moment. So this merit and increase, this is an ongoing. So I guess my question, and we're looking at it right now, we're in the middle of it, is can we sustain ourselves in the future with this increase? Because will you be coming back to the cities and saying, we're now going to increase a 20% percentage to what you pay today or what you give to Valley Metro? And that to me is a little tricky in that sense, because some cities may not be able to have it once COVID relief dollars are gone. And that's what's going to be reality. Right now, I feel like COVID dollars actually carried us through and have done some really creative wants that are needed in the community that we didn't have in the past, but reality is going to hit us. And so I'm trying to figure out the future or predict
as to what we do today, are we going to be able to sustain it in the future? And in the future, are we going to say, we can no longer pay at this level, or we're going to have to start to sweep the vacancies that we have in order to put back into the budget. So those are just questions, thoughts. Don't need to respond, but I think that's something that we need to look at.
Thank you very much for that question, Vice Mayor Pastor. Yes, so to be very clear, the continuation of the funding of this increase is incorporated into the FY23 budget that the board has received. It has about a $1.6 million impact in that overall budget, which is probably 0.4 or 0.2% on the overall base operating budget for the agency. So we do very much believe this is sustainable. And as I mentioned earlier, we really think it's pay me now or pay me later. If we don't address the turnover issues that we're having, we'll still incur the cost associated with those vacancies in terms of overtime costs and the cost of refilling these positions at higher amounts. When folks leave, we have to hire new people.
Councilmember Stipp, and then Councilwoman Arredondo Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jim, I think it's important to also kind of remind us of the change that was made on the administrative side of the House in the form of I think it was $2.7 million reduction in costs. There's some, I don't want to say offset for this necessarily, but can you talk to that a little bit? Because that's the line or the pot of money that this comes out of as we move forward.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for that question. So as Councilmember Stipp raised, the first step in our budget process this year was to go back and say, what things can we cut out before we ever come to the board? Those reductions resulted in about $3 million of cuts across the two agencies. And so as I mentioned a minute ago, this is about a $1.6 million add back against that. So this will be fully paid for by the cuts that we've already incorporated as part of our base budget.
So when we talk about the ongoing impact of something like this, now that does not include any of the other, if you look at that chart, we had 3 lines. This doesn't include any of the others, but at least from a long-term perspective as it relates to the employees, this is, we've got some protection, if you will, from the long-term implication.
Absolutely.
Councilwoman.
Great, thank you, Jim. One of the questions, and I know we've talked about this in AFS over the years, when we talked about market rate studies, and I certainly understand, and I'm not suggesting that we don't move forward with the COLA. I know there's 2 different things, but in one of the responses of one of the questions that we asked was about market rate studies and classifications and really trying to understand the trends of, especially those positions that have continually have trends for vacancies and those that are just really hard to fill, right? Well, in the response that I received, it basically said that Valley Metro's classification structure is 16 years old. And so my thought process is, okay, well, that obviously needs to be on the front burner. And in order for us to, I think, really have good data, at what point are we going to really address our classifications and then ensure that we have a market rate study that is consistent? And I think what's going to be really good for our employees to continue to do that. So is that on the radar?
Yes, and thank you for pointing that out. That's an excellent point. So issue number 30 in your issue detail package is in fact the classification compensation study and update. And the very last step of that class and comp study is a market rate study. And so I think everyone here probably knows, so your classification compensation structure is not only what are all the positions and their job descriptions, but then how do they come together to form career paths for folks so that people have, places to promote to and grow so we can retain talent. And so as the council member mentioned, the last class and comp study Valley Metro did was in 2006, which was the year before the original iPhone. So needless to say, it was bad out of date, even before we got into this crazy labor market that we're in now. So we absolutely know that we need to update that. It's because this has been because we're aware of that, and with the support of Councilmember Arredondo Savage, we've included in this year's budget. It's a fairly modest cost. I think it's $300,000, but really only a slice of that, probably less than a quarter impacts city cost. We think that's absolutely critical because it's going to be almost impossible for us to be competitive in this labor market with any level of COLA if we've got outdated position descriptions, if we're not offering people, the opportunities to promote that they need, and quite frankly, if we can't assure equity within our own ranks. One of the problems that you have with an outdated class and comp structure is the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and pretty quickly the system as a whole sort of just gets out of whack. So we think it's critically important to address that as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on WebEx? All right. This item is for action, so I ask to request a motion and a second to approve the 5% COLA effective May 2nd, 2022.
I move item 5, 2022 cost of living adjustment for Valley Metro staff.
Vice Mayor Pastore.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Stipp. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, item number 6 on the agenda, transit asset management updates. Ms. Miller?
I wish that was.
Good morning again. I'd actually like to ask Wendy Platnitis to provide this update. She is our Transit Asset Management Program Coordinator.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Jessica, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Before I get to this presentation, I want to just provide a real quick summary of what TAM and asset management is. As many of you know, FTA brought TAM to transit agencies several years ago with requirements to inventory all assets and do condition assessments on all of our assets and then report back annually to the FTA. We work really closely with the asset owners and the maintenance staff to look at asset needs, what overhauls or capital replacement or renewal costs are coming up. And a year ago, we embarked on a study to look out 20 years. We call it a 20-year needs assessment and analysis with the goal to look at our funding and resource needs to ensure that we could continue to maintain not only our current assets, but those new assets coming into the program. So I want to introduce Herb Higginbotham, who is with our TAM consultant, and he will take you through a few slides of this presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. And thumbs up, you can all hear me just fine? Awesome, great, thank you. So as Wendy mentioned, we have been supporting her team in order to conduct this analysis. It's a contrast to item 5 on the COLA adjustments you just talked about. In terms of people, this really is looking at now all the things, all the stuff that Valley Metro runs out in the street, the buses, the trains, all the supporting infrastructure that allows the system to operate, and thinking about the needs and funding analysis for those for the next 50 years. Or 20 years, excuse me. Next slide, please. So again, 3 main purposes today. We want to familiarize you with what those long-term requirements and costs will be for the system. And really now thinking about Valley Metro transitioning, particularly in the rail side, from a newer system to a more mature system. As we think about our own vehicles, houses, et cetera, we know that as our assets age, they require more maintenance, more upkeep. So that's some of the same things that Valley Metro will need to look through in the future as well. And then we want to highlight the role that local funding plays in that. Of course, many of you have the distinct role of being able to understand, local needs and priorities and resources as they relate to Valley Metro. And so we want to highlight that as too. Next slide, please. So if I can try to simplify what was a really extensive technical analysis into a few boxes. I'll start you on the left-hand side. In the upper left, transit has a variety of funding related to the capital side, buying new things. We used a lot of your data in order to fund this, to make sure that we're building this off of exactly how you're running things. So the expansion plans that you have right now are built into this plan, as well as the cost for replacing assets that currently exist in the system. Those are compared to then capital funding profiles. So on the capital side, what is the money that's available, both federally, state, and local, in order to understand what it costs to replace and add in new assets. On the bottom left, I want to focus you, then we did the same thing on the maintenance side. Maintenance funding and resources come through the operations and maintenance side of the budget. As you know, in transit, those two pots are very distinct. So we used maintenance records as they exist now, contract values as they exist now, to understand what the cost for maintaining every asset class is, compare that to the funding available at the federal, state, and local level. And then what we did is, in the analysis piece, is look at that year over year to understand where there are surpluses or deficits in any given year and balance those against need, so that we can then come up with an overall profile over the next 20 years of what a capital spend might look like, a maintenance spend might look like, and then critically, what does the asset's performance forecast to change over time as a result? And what do asset FTE needs forecast to change over time as a result? Next slide, please. We built another number of assumptions, of course, into it, relied on real data as much as possible, but when you're looking out 20 years, you have to assume certain things. So generally, we're assuming that the bus fleet is not really expanding beyond some known short-term purchases. And on the rail side, we are assuming the full implementation of your rail expansion plan. We are assuming in this analysis that the public transportation funds provided through Proposition 400 are in fact renewed. And we're assuming that asset funding reserves year over year can carry to fund any intermediate gaps that would occur. Some general assumptions around cost inflation, as well as fund inflation and growth rates that would come across the board. And then we're using a lot of, again, not only real data, but then industry standard metrics and measures as we're looking forward. Things like life cycle cost as they vary between a light rail vehicle or a bus or a piece of track, et cetera. Likewise, as Wendy mentioned, many of these steps are related to FTA compliance that is required. And so we use FTA performance metrics for the performance analysis. We've taken a variety of metrics that FTA requires Valley Metro to report on, and we've normalized that to a 0 to 100 scale for the purpose of this analysis to simplify. Next slide, please. So the result of all this work are two summaries that we'll go over in the next two slides. On this one, we'll cover Valley Metro Rail. On the next one, RPTA. And I will take a little bit of time to walk you through. There's a lot of information on these slides, but it was important for us to really put in one place something that you could look and see where all of these different things, such as funding and performance, come together. On the top left side, on that graphic, that capital graphic, you'll see bars going up into the air. Those represent the need in any given years. The big gray need is related to the expansion program, large capital projects. And then the smaller color bars relates to various asset classes in terms of their replacement cycles. Matched behind that in the light gray area is then the funding that is available year over year right now. And so what you'll see is in the early years of the plan, so the first 10 years, there's a really strong match between funding and needs. And this is not a coincidence. This is the result of your teams, your planning and finance teams, along with your asset owners and asset management teams, working in close collaboration to make sure that in any given year, the capital funds are requested and programmed to meet the needs that are forecasted. But what you'll see in the second half of the plan, in the last 10 years of the plan, is that we start to see that the currently forecasted funding that would be available is not quite reaching what the needs would be. And in particular, you'll see some green and blue bars that are extending up. This is when you're really replacing the core of that initial system, that initial rail system of vehicles and other infrastructure. As they start to come due for replacement, you'll need to continue to be thoughtful about how you program additional funds at every level of government in order to meet the needs of that system. I want to flip to the bottom left, that maintenance cost and funding graph. And what you'll see there, again, bars represent need, The gray area in the back represents funding. You'll see that in most years, particularly again in the early years, funding and needs match up pretty well. But you'll see over time, those needs bars start to just peak over the top of that available funding in any given year. It's not a lot. It might be 5 to 10% in any given year, but it will have an additive effect over time. And again, this is just simply a result. As you get more assets into the system, and as those assets age, they require more dollars in order to maintain. So what does all this mean in terms of the performance of those assets? I'll direct your eyes to the top left, or sorry, the top right. And you'll see a graph. I'll focus you on the line, the darkest line, which is aggregate. You'll see smaller lines for each of the various asset classes. But that darker line represents in total, what does performance look like? You'll see performance right now and through the first 10 years of the plan is expected to remain at 100%. I'll say this is outstanding. We work with a lot of transit agencies, and this is atypical in a good way from a lot of the rail systems that we look at, which typically have performance metrics that are down in the 40 to 60% range for a mature or aging system. Your newer system, though, doing really well. Your team's doing a really great job to maintain those and keep them in a good state of good repair. But over time, were you not to be able to meet some of those capital replacement needs we talked about, or some of those maintenance deficits that we saw, performance would degrade on the assets. It just simply means that if you don't have the money maybe to buy that new piece of equipment in any given year and you have to defer that, well, then performance should expect to go down. Or you don't have the money to maybe do all the maintenance cycles that you would want. You might need to take a few assets out of commission in any given time. And so you'll see performance doesn't degrade incredibly over the second 10 years, but you'll do start to see a marked decrease over time. On the FTE side, this is basically just the FTE needs as you increase the number of assets in the system. So that increase in number of assets, this is totally irrespective of anything you all just talked about, what Jim just sort of mentioned in terms of some deficits in FTEs staffing. What this is showing is that simply as you have more assets in the system, you require more people in order to maintain them at the same levels. Likewise, as assets age, each asset requires a little more attention than it did before. And so what you'll see in those is just simply a stepwise increase in the number of FTEs that will be required to maintain a fleet as you continue to expand it. Next slide, please. Let's look at the story on the RPTA and the bus side. A little bit different story here, and one that I want to focus again on the top left, on the capital side. You'll see the first few years needs and funding match fairly well. And you'll see then there are a few years where there actually appears to be a bit of a funding surplus. And I'll contrast that within the next few years where there's a couple places where there's a little bit greater need. And this simply is a result of having to program your funding to match the needs. This is where a flexible SGR account will come in really handy. It'll allow you to make sure that you're spending to the fullest of the funding that's available, particularly at the federal side in any given year. And at the same day that you're making allowances for the fact that there's a variability in terms of when buses and other assets on the RPTA side come due. That kind of creates a bit of more of an up and down year to year. And so your teams, if we've talked to them, they'll do a great job, I think, of making sure that some of that leveling out of the funding matches exactly what the need will be. But suffice to say, that will be something to look forward to ahead of time. In the bottom left, in our maintenance funding graph, what I want to point out is that actually maintenance funding we showed to be in a pretty good place going forward. The one caveat I'll say is, as you know, on the RPTA side, your maintenance funds really are allocated to a few key contracts. What we aren't really able to do, at least in this analysis, is really forecast what those stepwise increases in contract values might be. We know that your contractors, as many contractors, are already been going back to ask for, hey, what we need, an adjustment to our contract, ahead of time right now, anyhow. So we don't have things like that programmed in. We also don't know the next time you'll let contracts, will you see a regular increase in these contract values, or will it sort of trend like we see with some of our other clients, where you might see more of a step in some of these? So while it appears that all is well on the RPTA side, and I don't mean to say that anything different than that, I will caution that there's less visibility into some of the funding, or sorry, the needs as it relates to just a few main contracts. As for performance, the performance in the bus side is outstanding. It's expected to remain outstanding, given that our funding and our needs match fairly well here. Likewise, without any sort of real forecast expansion to the bus fleet, our FTE counts remain relatively stable over the life of this plan. Next slide. So to start wrapping us up, and again, I appreciate your time to, what's a fairly heady topic. Some of the conclusions: asset performance is outstanding right now, despite some challenges in filling and retaining key positions. You do have the funding in place to build out rail and maintain what you have now, with Prop 400 being renewed and the member city contributions remaining stable. On the Valley Metro rail side and the VMR side, we did highlight in those out years that funding starts to not keep pace as maintenance needs increase. And that will have an effect on asset performance over time. Likewise, FTE counts are likely understated. Current analysis doesn't really, take into effect all of the variability in the FTE market today. On the RPTA side, again, performance strong and stable at current service levels. Of course, we've got lower visibility into what is needed over in the out years. And then last slide, please. So what do we recommend? Some recommendations for you to, take and file away. Flexibility in how PTF funds are able to be spent on either asset capital and maintenance would really help the Valley Metro team be able to make the right decisions. As we saw here, those decisions are often very closely linked. When you repair and replace are decisions that go hand in hand. And it puts an agency at a bit of a disadvantage if they can only fund from one or the other. The more flexibility they have in any of their funds makes it easier for them to sort of hit need year over year. Likewise, secure mechanisms from local funding so that Valley Metro can do more planning beyond a one or short term horizon in order to meet minimum service levels. The more security that can be built into any of the local funding mechanisms that you're able to provide, the more that they can do some detailed planning on a 5 and 10-year basis for the system. And then third recommendation is around that flexible SGR reserve fund that we talked about. That's something I know that Valley Metro really values as a way to be able to mitigate any uncertainty as some of the rail capital replacements will come out. And then the last three recommendations are all around analysis like this. The more that we are able to integrate an analysis like this into your annual budgeting process, you can start making really smarter decisions so that you're really spending every dollar wisely and increasing the effectiveness of asset maintenance. I'll equate it to, an example that we'll use often is simply, repairing or maintaining your roof to avoid the leak cost a lot less than when you do have the leak, right? And you start to have water damage in the house. But sometimes it might not be something that we might not see when everything's fine. And so the idea of an analysis like this and doing this on a repetitive basis allows us to be able to make sure that we're optimizing spend year over year. And with that, I will conclude and open to any questions you may have.
Perfect. Thank you. Any board members have questions, comments? Seeing none. This item was for information. If you have any additional questions or comments, reach out to staff if you do on this item. So we'll move on from here. Item number 7. Councilmember Ship.
Yeah, I was just scanning through the remainder. These are slides embedded within this. Can we get this pulled out of the packet? Is it big enough that or small enough that you can email it? Kind of as a standalone document. This is a lot of information, and I think for some cities it may be very beneficial. And some of the slides didn't translate the way that they did here, so thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, item number 7, FY 2023 operating capital budget information for Valley Metro RPTA and Valley Metro Rail. I'll have Ms. Miller introduce this item.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask Jim Hilliard and Tyler Olson to present, but to the extent that the board has questions about specific items, I'd like to defer to our subject matter experts from our respective disciplines to respond with an overview of what exactly those budget items are. We, in response to our last Audit Finance Committee, we're repackaging this information to really focus less on a list of items that we want to purchase or services that we'd like to purchase in the FY23 fiscal year, and focus that more on what we're hoping to achieve and what those strategic goals are, and then how these items actually relate and support those. For instance, there are a couple of items here that focus on transit asset management, which we just discussed. And so I hope that we'll be able to create a clear picture of where we're going and how we're going to get there. So Jim, go ahead.
Thank you, Jessica. Gina, if you could take us to the agenda side, please. So as Jessica mentioned, as Mr. Stipp underscored earlier, this conversation was intended to build on the April AFS meeting. At that meeting, we took a deep dive into the Valley Metro recommendations in the 23 budget. There was a lot of great discussion. In fact, there was so much great discussion that I think we got through about a third of them. And so after that meeting, Mr. Stipp took me aside and we talked a little bit about how we might be able to make sure the board's getting the whole picture and in context, but then also having an opportunity to ask detailed questions about the issues that jump out at them without sort of getting lost in the weeds and bogging down. And so in response to that then, as Jessica just mentioned, we've got sort of 2 things we'd like to do with you today. Next slide, please, Gina. So the first one is just to highlight this this budget by goal document that Jessica and Mr. Stipp mentioned. So our initial presentation of the budget was really high on transparency in terms of providing all the various detail on the moving pieces. But we think what got lost in that a little bit was, what are we trying to accomplish? And so the document that you have in your packet before you takes those 43 individual changes from the recommendations, and then it groups them under the 6 major goals that we're trying to accomplish, so that board members have a sense of what they're intended to impact, and also how they relate to each other, since a number of these issues kind of have interdependencies. So a couple quick things by way of describing that document. The first is we needed to put this together in about the 5-6 business days between the end of the AFS meeting and the time when the board packets had to go out. So we prioritize speed over beauty. Therefore, it's a big blunt of text right now. We definitely were going to come back and sort of provide to it our typical level of graphical polish. There just kind of wasn't time if we were going to have it in front of the board for today's meeting. So hope you'll bear with us a little bit on the monolithic formatting. We'll work on that. The second thing to note is this groups the recommendations by the goal that's intended to accomplish. It doesn't actually change the content of the recommendations. So as you're reading through the document, you get to sort of see them in that context. When you come to a specific recommendation, it's italicized in the text of the document, so you know we're talking about a specific thing here. And then you also see the issue number in parentheses behind that issue, so that if you want to dig deeper and understand that issue better, you can go back to these issue detailed sheets that are part of your original packet. The other thing to mention about the issue detailed sheets is we continue to improve upon these based upon the feedback that we're getting from you and your staff. And so each month, as we're going to reissue that packet with the new updates and improvements in it, the way that you can see an update is in this text. If something has changed over the course, we show that in italics. So you know it's new. You don't have to go searching for what we've improved. So we're hoping to continue to make this a useful reference document for the board and for your staff as we go forward. So with that in mind, we weren't planning on drilling into the issue by goal document. We hope that it's something that's useful for you. If you have questions about it, I'm absolutely delighted to answer those today. But I think the second thing we took away from the AFS meeting was, rather than us blather on interminably about issues that you may or not be interested in, that we should let you set that tone and ask us the questions of the things you'd like to know more about. So we put that call out to you and your staff over the last 2 weeks, and you certainly answered. So since I think last Wednesday and this morning, we got 41 questions from board members and their staffs. I think we've gotten out answers to all 41 of those as of this morning. As Mr. Stipp mentioned, we replied individually to each city with the answers to its questions, but we're compiling that into a larger question log document that we're going to make available to every board member every month, so that you can see, as he said, all the questions that have been asked by every city and the answers to those. We're ordering it by the issue numbers, so all the questions that are about the operations contingency are together, right? Rather than sorting it by city or by the date that we received the question or anything else, to make it more easy for you to reference. So we'll be getting that updated. The log that you had in your packet that went out on Friday is the questions that we had as of about the middle of last week when we had to get the packet out. We'll be getting a new question log out to board members and to your staff, probably either today or tomorrow, incorporating the 41 questions that we've received in the last few days so that everybody can see that. I was afraid if we tried to send that out last night that we'd confuse people by which version am I looking at. So we'll have that out to you after today's meeting. What we thought we could do to make the best use of our time today was first for me to highlight a few of the common questions that we saw from a number of cities that seemed to be, areas that needed more explanation in the 40 questions that we received. So I think there's 6 of those I'd like to go through with you. And one of them is getting back to a question Representative Tomlichov asked at our study session, which is, okay, we know we've got these labor wage problems for our operators. What are we going to do about it? So we wanted to sort of share with you what we know, what we don't know, as part of that response. Then I'll try to move through those as quickly as I can, and then I'm just here to take your questions on things you'd like to understand better or hear more about. And then as Councilmember Stipp mentioned, I think our objective for the May AFS and board cycle would then be to turn our attention to the inflationary and continuing commitment items in the budget. Those are areas where the board has a lot less discretion. There are things, we're going to pay for gas. The real question is, how do you forecast the price of gas? But they're also the single biggest dollar amounts in the budget. So it is important that we don't gloss over those. So we'll be able to spend some time both with the subcommittees and with the full board in the May cycle on those. Okay, so with that, Pat, or it's Gina. So the first question that we got from a number of areas, and it's going to be maybe a little hard for you to see this on the screen, but it was about the bus security coordinator position. And there were 2 different versions of this question. One version was, well, it looks like you already have a security coordinator. Why do you need another one? Gina, if you could, please. And so what's being referenced there is that position right in the middle, filled by a fellow named Anthony Heller. And so its title is Transit Security Coordinator. So the answer to the question is, this is the fellow that does all of the things we're talking about for transit security, works as a liaison to police departments, supervises our security contract for the rail system. So we currently have a position that does what we're talking about, but only for rail. And of course, while the rail system's important, it gets a ton of traffic and passengers. It really only interacts with 3 cities at this point. And so that's an important job. On the bus side, we know we're interacting with 19 different cities, 19 different police departments, and a whole lot more riders in total across all of those different routes. So we think it's really important that we create some parity with the bus system to make sure that when we're having security incidents on the bus, that those operators have someone they can go to, that those police departments have someone that they can go to, that prosecutors have someone they can go to ensure that we're getting the kind of consistent follow through and follow up on these issues, and being able to really build collaboration across jurisdictions, so that if Mesa's having a problem that Tempe's also having, that we're able to put those 2 police departments in touch, because otherwise it might not come up and they might not know. So the second question that we got on this position was over on the right-hand side of the org chart. There's a manager of bus travel safety and a vacant travel safety position. And so then the other question was, well, wait a minute, it looks like you already have some bus safety position empty. Why are we talking about creating a different position? And so the key here is the difference between safety, which is protection from unintentional harm because we're having accidents, because we're not maintaining the brakes on the vehicles, because our workers aren't following OSHA requirements. That's safety, versus security, which is protection from crime, right? And so these are sort of 2 different functions that exist in our world, safety and security. We have a safety position that's doing accident reconstructions, making sure we're following OSHA. That's really a different skill set than the security position we're talking about, right? The security position is really more of a policing and investigations background, where this is a more of a quality control and regulatory background. So Two important roles, but very distinct, both very much full-time. So we wanted to answer those questions because I think the org chart was creating some confusion that we didn't adequately address in our additional write-up. So we hope that helps, because basically every city that talked to us had those same two questions in one form or another. Okay, if there aren't any questions on that, I'll move into maybe something a little more substantive. It seems like not. Please, Pat, or please, Gina. Okay, and that's the operations contingency. So this is issue number 17 in your detailed sheet, if anybody is reading along with that. And so just as a reminder, the goal of this issue is to ensure that in this time of rapid wage rate changes that are impacting our contracts, most of whom were bid years ago, that didn't anticipate high rates of inflation and high rates of wage changes, that the board has the ability, some flexibility to be able to make changes in order to maintain service. And so the issue obviously that we're having here is, as an example, our East Valley bus service contract was actually issued 4 years ago. I think it included like a 1 or a 2% wage rate increase for drivers involved in that contract. And that's not the world we live in anymore. And so as a result, they're dealing with high levels of vacancy. I think since November, when we started tracking it closely, we went from that contractor missing 400 trips a month to now 4,000 trips a month in February. And I don't have the March data, but it's going to be worse. And I think we've heard it from our public comment today. So we know that these contractors are not being able to hire and retain qualified operators at the rates that were baked into the contracts when they were issued years ago. And we think they probably need to be adjusted. And we want to make sure that the board has some flexibility to do that. And I keep saying the board because the key thing to recognize here, and I note it at governance at the bottom of this slide, is in order to make changes to these contracts, the board will have to approve that. When those contractual changes increase the cost of the contract, the board will have to approve that. Right? So this isn't a Valley Metro slush fund. This is some flexibility for the board to use to fund the changes that either decides to make or decides not to make. And then I think the question that Representative Tomlichov had for us in the study session was, well, if we know this is a problem, why aren't we just including the solution in the budget? Which is an excellent question. So with that, let me take you to the next slide. So the challenge is there's some things we know, and then there's some things we don't know. Among the things we know is that this is a nationwide problem. APTA, the National Survey for Transportation Agencies, did a survey of 117 agencies in February. They found that 92% of them were having trouble staffing, and that the hardest position they were finding to staff were bus operators. 49% of them had actually cut service as a result of staffing shortages, and 52% had already made changes in wages. So it's something that everybody's grappling with across the country. This is just that larger shift in the labor market. The problem is, of course, this really started to become apparent once the Omicron wave began to ebb away, because that was sort of hiding the fact that you had all this pent-up demand in the labor market and too little supply. And so once that wave ebbed, then suddenly we started seeing this giant shift in the Great Resignation and people, moving and costs increasing. And so the fact that really just started in sort of November, December, your contracting cycle, whether you're talking about a bus contract or a CBA between your bus operator and, a collective bargaining agreement between your bus operator and their union, those things are negotiated over the course of months. So really, they're just starting to get inked today. Which means when we reach out to our colleagues at APTA and other places and say, hey, what are other systems seeing? What's going on? The answer we're mostly getting is, yeah, we're working on that too. Because the cake's not baked yet. If we can go to the next slide, Gina. Now, at this distance, it's a little bit of an eye test, so I'll just call out the key numbers for you. One of the things we know is that before the labor market blew up, Valley Metro wages for bus operators were about average for our peer group. So what you see here is our typical peer group plus a couple extras we threw in. I think we added Atlanta and Portland, which we don't typically include in our normal peer group. What you have in the first column is the maximum wage allowed by our contract or CBA, whichever one is relevant. And then there's a couple columns about the dates of those contracts, and you can tell by the expiration date kind of how current the contracts are. You see there's a whole bunch of those that have 2022 expiration dates. So those are contracts that were bid 3 and 4 years ago. They're now expiring. There's just a couple that have much sooner expiration dates, and I'm going to key on those in just a second. So then reading sort of over to the right-hand side of the chart, one of the challenges that we have in comparing ourselves to other cities like, Seattle, for example, is, well, the cost of living is much higher in Seattle than it is here. So how do you really make an accurate comparison of wages? And so the way that we're doing that here is we're using in the second column from the left, the Bureau of Labor Statistics cost of living index for those metro areas. And so that gives us a way of comparing the cost of living for those, each city. And then what we do is we modify the wage proportionally based upon that cost of living. So on that far right-hand column, what you're getting is sort of an apples to apples comparison of the maximum bus operator wage between these other metro areas after you take into account the cost of living, right? So it's really showing you the buying power of that wage in that city. Okay, so a couple things that jump out in looking at this. The first is, prior to everything going crazy, we were about average, right? The mean wage, or the average wage, maximum wage for an operator was $26.48, and we're at a cost of living adjusted level of $26.14. So just a smidge below the average, probably about 3%. You see Phoenix on there. That's actually the city of Phoenix's contract with First Transit. So we're maybe 3% below where the city of Phoenix is today. Okay, so we were not badly out of whack with our peer group at the start of this explosion in the labor market. If you go to the next slide, please. So where are we today? So this is not scientific. This is me spending 45 minutes on Indeed.com looking at job postings. But I think the thing to really note here is that first column is the advertised starting wage. And what I was showing you a minute ago was the maximum wage in our CBA. So the maximum wage in our current CBA, and I'm sorry, in the CBA of our current contract with First Transit is like $27 and change. And as you can see, there was only one company that was offering a starting wage that was lower than that in my quick survey of those job listings. So clearly we've got a significant problem. The market for folks with CDL licenses, and these, by the way, are local CDL positions, so they're not long haul overnight. They're just people hauling stuff around town in the same way that we haul people around town, has really blown up. It's by no means a scientific survey. It's also not perfect. So that very bottom one of Jackson's food stores, that's actually the Jackson's truck stops. And that's for a trucker that's hauling fuel. So you not only have to have a CDL, you have to have a hazmat cert. So that's not a perfect comparison, but for $36 an hour, I'd get a hazmat cert. I'd stop driving a bus where I have to deal with crabby customers. And so I think this is a really compelling comparison. If we go to the next slide, please, Gina. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of things we don't know. And as I mentioned earlier, we really don't know, how this is shaking out across the country, because everybody's at the same stage of this as we are, which is we know we've got a problem and we're just starting to get our arms around the solution. The other thing that hasn't happened is in each of these cases, sort of we have a contract with the service provider. That service provider has a CBA with the union, and and so there's two different levels of negotiation that have to happen in order for us to come back with an actual number for you. Okay, so this is a long-winded way of hopefully Member Tomaltop responding to your question of, we know we have a problem. We are pretty clear that we're going to have to make adjustments because we just can't be competitive when our top wage is lower than the starting wage that other companies are offering. But we don't feel like we can responsibly bring a number to you yet. We're still getting our arms around what the market's going to demand. We think we're going to need another couple months to do that. And so it could possibly be before the budget's adopted in June, but it might not. And so as a result, I think the way that we're trying to strike that balance is to suggest to the board that it includes a contingency in the budget that sets aside money to be able to make adjustments when we're able to come to the board with a proposal that we think bears its consideration. And then should the board decide to adopt that, those changes can be made. Now, I'll just say a couple of things. There's two probably ways to do this. On the RPTA side, you can just direct us to set aside PTF, because that PTF stays in the fund, it's fund balance, it's not going anywhere, and we're not going to be able to use it without you changing the contracts first, right? So that doesn't impact city budgets, and it gives you good flexibility on the RPTA side of this. Now, on the Valley Metro Rail side, it's a little bit more complicated because, as you may recall, Valley Metro Rail is about a 70-30 split between city funds and all other funds, right? And so on the Valley Metro Rail side, we can't just set aside PTF because you can't use PTF for VMR operations. And so there, either cities would have to include this in your budgets, we would include it in our IGAs with you, and then you would either transmit it to us, and if you decided not to use it, we'd give it back to you. Or I'm sure we could have an arrangement where cities carve that money out and set it aside in their own budgets, and you only gave it to us after the board made the decision that it wanted to use it. right? And I think either of those is acceptable. We just have to make sure there's a number in the budget, because if there's not a number, then you have no flexibility to work with as this goes forward. So, so I hope that helps provide a little more context for both why we think this is an important thing to do, and frankly, something we're going to have to deal with sooner or later in any case. And then also why we don't feel comfortable coming to you with a proposal yet, because things are just moving so fast, and we really want to make sure that we've done our homework and can make a strong recommendation when that time comes. So are there questions on this issue before I move on to the next?
Question? Councilwoman Tamacho?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. And you know, I've already said this about Valley Metro staff, that pay is obviously probably primary consideration. But are we looking at other flexibilities that could be offered, like the 410s or other more flexible work schedules for these operators, that we would be able to have rolling, you know, schedules of 410s and things that would maybe make, you know, I mean, honestly, I think the workforce has kind of had it with the public, generally speaking, and these operators, you know, fit into that category where hospitality industry and these industries where you're face to face with the general public. A lot of people just don't want to do that anymore. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. But, you know, if we could address that also, I mean, I think the money obviously matters, but there may be some other things that other cities are doing. And then quickly, I don't know whether, I mean, are you talking about on the recommendation, a dollar amount or just a block of contingency money? Or are you saying some percentage of the actual budget? Or before I'd want to move forward with the recommendation, I'd like to know, like, what exactly are you talking about as a placeholder in the contingency?
Yeah, thank you so much for those questions and observations. So first, couldn't agree more. We think workplace flexibility is just part of the basic expectation going forward. And as I mentioned, you know, the trick here is that's us going to our contractor and saying, hey, have you thought about that? And then that contractor having a negotiation with the union, and then something has to come back through that game of telephone. So that's part of the reason why we don't feel like we can come to you today, because, you know, those conversations kind of take some time to play out, and they're really just beginning. But we completely agree that needs to be part of the discussion to try to find ways to address quality of life in addition to level of pay.
Through the chair, are the conversations happening?
They've just started.
Okay.
So yes, they have. But I think, you know, frankly, our contractors have been as taken aback by this as we are. One of the things I want to say to their credit is, you know, they recognize they have a commitment to us to provide operators and to provide service. And so in a number of cases, I know on our paratransit side, also on our bus service contract, they've stepped up and out of their own pocket increased starting costs. They've stepped up and done hiring bonuses and referral bonuses out of their own pockets to try to fill these jobs. And I think that's part of what we're waiting to see play out, because we kind of want them to experiment with their money, and then we know what works. Then we can come back and be like, okay, you've proven this works. Now let's modify the contract to build on it. But I think this needs to be part of the conversation as well.
Chair, if I may respond additionally. So I'm jumping on this train as it's kind of pulling into the station, but some of the things that we're going to be looking at are the way we structure schedules. You could do longer straight schedules where you don't have a break in the middle. It can increase your cost per mile. So we'll have to be very sensitive to that. We can also look at the way the work is assigned and do different things that make the work itself more attractive in addition to pay. Some of the things we can also look at right now, these labor contracts tend to have step rates in them, and we're reporting top pay here in those peer groups. One of the things that a lot of properties are doing are starting those new operators higher on that step rate so that they can get them to that top pay closer in response to the evolving workforce conditions. So it's pay, but it's other things too. It's the schedule, it's the benefits, it's the quality of life issues. It's also the promotional potential that these roles offer. So we will take a holistic look at what kind of jobs we're providing via our contractors and their respective CBAs and try and make them more attractive so that we can be sustainable, because just money alone in terms of wage rates will help, but it's not a panacea. We're going to need a broader solution set to really tackle this issue.
So if I can come back to Councilmember Thomas, the second part of her question, just very quickly. So you asked about the cost. So the cost that we're reflecting in the budget that's before you for FY23 is about $3.5 million for RPTA. And as I say, If you direct us to, that could be 100% PTF funded, and therefore it wouldn't impact city budgets at all. And it would just remain in the PTF fund unless and until the board directed us to use it. And about $4 million in total Valley Metro Rail costs. Now that $4 million of Valley Metro Rail cost, about 70% or 80% of that is going to need to be allocated to cities. And so that's really where the harder decision has to be made. And so just to put that in a little bit of context, Tempe is typically about 20 to 25% of VMR costs. So of that $1 million, they'd need, or that $4 million, they'd need to set aside $1 million. And so that's, I think, the part where we have to make sure that we're communicating clearly so that the board has flexibility when it's time to use it.
We have Councilmember Stipp.
I think one of the questions that I had sent on this particular subject was if we expose what we're setting aside for our contingency, that seems to be an opportunity for a contractor to go, well, there's $5 million set aside. Let's ask for 4 million of it, or let's ask for all 5 million of it. So I think we have to be cautious of this conversation in public, number one. And number two, we are talking about creating a contingency fund and not a spend. So from a budgetary perspective, I think we just have to be cautious and mindful of really what this is. Perhaps putting I'm going to say putting strings to it, but just putting some parameters on the use of this fund, et cetera, may be the course that makes everyone feel a little bit better as we progress through this budget discussion. Going forward, I'm trying not to, and I watched I just happened to catch, a Honeymooners episode, and it was I do not want to disparage the bus drivers, but obviously Ralph Crandon was a bus driver, and you think about him living in a tenement, et cetera, and we're having this discussion about wages, and I certainly do not want to push our operators, whether they're contractual or employees, into a tenement space. Nor do I want to push them into the Beverly Hills scenario, if I'm going to stick with old TV, and push them into a Beverly Hills mansion. So I think we just have to be cautious of how we're viewing this, but looking at this truly from a contingency perspective, as Jim's done a good job, I think, of explaining the problem, and now we have to provide them with kind of a box to stay within. So if there's a way, as we get ready to approve this budget, that we can put those constraints in place on the use of it and how we go forward, that may alleviate some of the concern about, and I think for me anyway, what's lingering behind the scenes is we all know that once we approve this budget, the CEO and basically everybody has full access to all of that money and can move it however you want. And I think there's some concern about this becoming a go-to fund. So if we can put some boxes around that and contain it, that may make us and our staffs feel a lot more comfortable about going forward. So that may be something we want to look at. How do we box this contingency piece for future use? Just a thought.
Absolutely. And I think, we respect the intent that the board expresses in the budget that it's passed. And if the board says this is only to be used for adjusting these contracts, that's all we'll use it for, and Sabrina can prove it. So I think there are definitely ways that we can do that. The other thing you brought up that I just want to underscore is, so we're talking about these numbers in a all RPTA and all VMR for a reason, because that rolls together 3 or 4 contracts so that no particular contractor has any idea of what we're, guesstimating at this early stage of the game. We can further obscure the final amounts by including whatever the board approves into other contingency lines. So the department normally carries about $500,000 of regular contingency in RPTA, which is why we're not hitting you all up for additional gas costs this year, because we were able to draw on that for the increase in gas costs, and about $1.5 million, I think, in VMR contingency. So we can sort of begin rolling different things together in a way in a budget so that as a contractor looking at the public document has no idea what number is composed of what. And so I think there are some ways that we can create some opaqueness to what the board decides to create as flexibility for itself, and then Councilmember Stipp's point, to ensure that you've got complete visibility into how it's being used and for the purpose.
Mayor Peterson?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to mention one thing that I haven't heard this morning is the culture. I think that one thing that we focus on in Gilbert with our recruitment and retainment is the culture. We want people to want to come to work in Gilbert every single day, so we find ways to make sure that it's the place that they want to be. And I think that Jessica has already started that, just being here such a short time with doing her meetings with the staff. And I would encourage things like that, because I think really it comes down to really the smallest things when it comes to making employees happy and them feeling that they are part of a team. And so I encourage more of that, please.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Harkey?
Yeah, I just want to echo Councilmember Stipp's comments and concerns. I share those in terms of we all realize and recognize the need to add appropriate wages that is going to work, but at the same time, not wanting to make it a gimme in the negotiation. So I echo Councilmember Stipp's thoughts and concerns.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Pastor?
I have a question about slide 29. Sorry, I raised my hand earlier, but kept going. That's okay. It's not your fault.
You have to raise your right hand, not your left hand.
Okay.
See it.
Oh, that was why.
When you're talking about the East Valley bus service and the West Valley bus service and the other ones, but in particular bus service, obviously we know that Phoenix does their own bus service. So in having this dialogue and contract, not contract, my thought process is if East Valley, West Valley, Phoenix has bus service, I believe that the collective should be together in negotiating salary and wages as a collective. Even though Phoenix runs it, we're still part of Valley Metro. And it's not, I'm gonna go to work for the East Valley right now, and then when Phoenix does their new contract, then I'm going to Phoenix and then jumping around the whole system, where I just feel like it should be consistent regardless of, and we saw it in the wages. I don't know what, I forgot in 30, but you saw it in the wages. Phoenix paid higher and Valley Metro paid lower. I just think we should just be consistent.
If I may, Chair. Yeah, I agreed. So we're going to have to look at these operating contracts, not as disparate contracts, but separate contracts that are part of a single whole. So I agree working on wage rates, on work rules as well. We're always going to face a little bit of competition between contracts by virtue of work location relative to employee location, but that's normal in any employer. So I agree. There are some gaps, I think, between operators and subcontractors, and then gaps still between operator, subcontractor, and the end user that we're going to have to work to overcome for sure.
Perfect.
Thank you. I have
go
one
ahead,
more
Vice
question about the contingency. If we, I probably should talk offside, but I'm not really sure. Contingency means to me in my head, emergency money, or there's a contingency to be able then to, if there's an item that we need to do and have, then we have at least those dollars at that moment. That's how I, in my head, and emergency money for my budget. And I understand contingency is you put money away just in case. The way we're having this dialogue, I feel we're just putting a savings away. And then when we have a contract negotiation, we know in our savings, we have these items. I don't feel comfortable. And so my question really is a bigger question in the sense of if Phoenix says, no, we don't want to do this, then what's the dynamics?
Good question.
Councilmember.
I just wanted to kind of tag on to what Councilman, or Vice Mayor Pastor was saying, is just looking at it, analytically, we're looking at Valley Metro's wages are 3% below Phoenix. Well, we know we have to fix that. And we know two things we do know, and we also know COLA is 5.9%. So we just by those two numbers, we know we're somewhere around 9% behind the 8 ball already when we start the conversation. So I'm not going to talk dollar amounts, but I mean, just with those two things, we know somewhere in that neighborhood, we're going to have to at least get to there. So I think that should be able to give us, as Vice Mayor Pastor said, some idea of, even if it's just a set aside in the budget or an allocation in the budget specifically for, addressing these contract issues, we should be able to come to some sort of a number that we know where we need to get. I mean, we know right now, we know we're probably at least at 9%.
And if I could just completely agree, and in fact, it's that kind of back of the envelope math that we did to come to the number that's in the 23 budget. We think it's reasonable, but until we really get into those three-way negotiations, we won't know what the final is. But that is kind of essentially what we've ballparked into the 23 budget, just to give the board some maneuvering room as we peel this onion more.
If I could, and this is something that we deal with, everybody deals with, it's that, handles lots of staffing and compensation is everybody else is going to be making adjustments too. So we have to also be, like I said, I don't want to put any of our operators in the Beverly Hills Hotel, but we also have to understand that fiscal year is ending for everyone. There's going to be adjustments made everywhere that you're comparing us to. So we don't want to be starting out on July 1st. Now we're already behind the 8 ball because we were basing what we're doing on what everybody else is doing. And now they've made adjustments and we're still at the bottom of the pack. So, this is a service that we as an organization are committed to providing. And we're going to have to figure out a way to fund these operators so that we can provide the service. These people, our residents, need the service to get to work, to get to the doctor appointments. It's just something that, we're going to have to deal with and find a way to address this. So.
Thank you.
So I'm hearing, if I may, Chair, I'm hearing both. It feels too ambiguous to include the single contingency. At the same time, we've got to be cautious as we approach contract negotiations, not to show our cards, if you will. And I don't know what past practice is and how this has been structured, but if there's a forum for us, and in the past, before I have approached labor contract negotiations, we had broad parameters set by the board, broad financial parameters per contract that we could operate within. So if there's an opportunity for us to put a finer point on that without publicly disclosing what those broad parameters are, such that we don't jeopardize our negotiating position, that might be a way that we can refine some of these figures and really hone in on what that's going to look like. But again, I don't know how that plays with our board policy and administrative code.
Jim, what's the timeline of the current negotiations or negotiations and contracts? 26.
We're having really informal conversations with our contractors now. So there's no specific timeline. It's really a case of the sooner we address this, the sooner we'll start to see less deterioration in service quality. But to Representative Tomachaw's point, because things are so dynamic right now, if we rush into it, we may miss the mark. And I think we don't want to do that for the numbers we're talking about.
I think we could provide you with a summary of contract expiration dates and the wage rates within each contract.
Yeah, let's do that. And then maybe we can have a discussion when those contracts are up where we can provide what you're saying as far as parameters to those contracts, right? So.
Mr. Chair, and so I'm going to ask our general counsel, contracts are subject matter that's allowed in executive session. So we could have this, that once we have actual more information, we could have more detailed discussions in executive session, couldn't we?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Tomachoff, yes, the rules that govern executive sessions allow for certain subject matter to be discussed there. One of them is contract negotiations. So in the event we wanted to have something like that, we can work to properly publicly notice it and then be prepared to present the material that can be covered confidentially.
Excellent, thank you.
Councilmember Stipp.
I think I just want to frame this in a way for us to just kind of set our own expectations. If we don't have the specifics of where those contractors are looking to go, if they don't know by June 15th, for example, when we theoretically want to approve the budget, what are we going to do? That's the bottom line. So if we're asking for some certainty in an area that may not reveal itself until July or August or September or December. So looking at this from a budget perspective, how do we handle that? The only way to handle that is a set aside. And I don't care what label you put on it, whether it's contingency, set aside, a
Super secret.
slush fund. I mean, whatever title you want to put on it. But the only way to do that is to set aside money. And I think that's what this budget item is looking for, is how do we set that money aside until those facts reveal themselves? What does that mean? So I would just encourage everyone to, think your way through that. Let's set our own expectations about what we can and cannot do with these contracts. The contracts aren't up until 25 and 26. So this is an interim adjustment that, and we just went through it in the West Valley maybe 2 years ago now, where they said we can't meet the contract obligation, and we went through that. So this is the same kind of thing. So I'm just cautioning us to set our own expectations and as far as how we go. And maybe it's just a different title and it's some other way, but.
The super secret mystery reserve.
There you go.
All right.
Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
more slides.
Oh, you bet. I'll move quickly. Gina, if you could go to the employee relations slide. So the next two are very quick. We received several questions on the need for an employee relations position at our operations and maintenance center. And basically the question was, so what do supervisors do versus what do employee relations staff do? And so the short answer to that question is we expect supervisors to handle the day-to-day supervision, coaching, performance management, performance evaluations, hands-on kind of training of all the folks on their team. Where they really need some expert support is when we start to get into the areas of sort of employment law. And that would be things like overseeing our FDA drug and alcohol testing program, workers' comp, ADA, FMLA. Like, you get those things wrong and you get sued. And so we have employee relations staff that can serve as essentially an internal consultant to our supervisors to just help make sure that they're doing that right. So if a supervisor is writing up some form of formal discipline, a suspension or a memo of concern, that goes through the employee relations person to make sure that it's been handled fairly, that we're documenting it correctly, et cetera. And so that's really the distinction there. We right now have about 400 employees, 450 total positions in the agency, with one employee relations specialist for all of those folks who sits here in this building and who works 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. At the OMC, you've got another 224 people that are working 3 shifts a day. So what we would really like to do is to create that employee relations specialist position at the OMC that can be stationed there, working face-to-face with those supervisors and employees, and also being available on second and third shift to make sure that those folks are getting their needs met in the same way that everybody else is. So that's essentially the notion here. Moving on, since I know we've already eaten up a bunch of time, another question that came up was with respect to the Super Bowl event. We have $150,000 in regional PTF in the budget to support the Super Bowl. And one of the great questions that has come up with staff and in AFS was, well, what'd you do last year and how much did that cost? So quick answer to that question. What we did in 2015 was a bunch of wayfinding, sort of how do you get to your event, how do you get to various venues, signage, advertising, but then also infrastructure, like we set up queue lines so that when people were lined up to get on and off of trains, that they were doing that in an orderly fashion rather than it just kind of becoming a big mob and running the risk of maybe somebody stumbling onto the tracks, et cetera. So in 2015, we spent $230,000 on that. Hillary's team this year is saying, we've played this game once before. We think we know how to do it more efficiently than we did in 2015. And that's why we're only asking for $150,000. By way of revenues, in 2015, we saw our advertising revenue jump 1.2 million over what it was in the year before and the year after. We also saw in the space of 5 days about almost $390,000 boardings, which resulted in an additional $184,000 in fair revenue. So this event will more than pay for itself. just in terms of those factors, not to mention, the goodwill that it brings to the region of us doing this correctly versus sort of having it be a cluster. Okay, so.
Go ahead. No, go ahead,
There's a
Robin.
lot of pressure over here. Thank you, Jim. And one of the things that we were kind of talking about in regards to the Super Bowl, and you talk about increased advertising for the year. And is that going to come in the form of increased advertising, like wrapping the buses, wrapping rail cars?
It is that form of
Can we kind
advertising.
of dig a
yes.
little bit deeper in that maybe in the months to come to just kind of see what that looks like?
Sure, absolutely. I think what we've penciled into the 23 budget is about $1 million increase. So we were a little more conservative than we were from 2015, just because this is a little bit of a weird advertising time at the end of COVID. But we could come back with some estimates from our advertising contractor.
Thank you. Wouldn't we be able to generate, I mean, I would expect we'd be able to generate additional revenue from advertising on the buses and trains, though.
Yes, that's the $1 million I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about costs.
No. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Then lastly, very quickly, in addition to the Super Bowl, we had 6 other communication and outreach recommendations in the budget. And so one of the questions that sort of came up in our conversation with staff and in AFS was, so why are there so many of these? And that answer really kind of can get answered to 2 tiers. I'll do the easy one and then hand off to Hillary for the more meaningful one. So the easy answer is we decided to break these out individually because we wanted to create transparency at the board to see what we thought was important and to give the board the opportunity to say, we agree, do that or don't do that. And if we had rolled them together into sort of a more aggregate item, you would have lost that transparency and the ability to sort of say yes or no on an individual basis. So from a budget policy perspective, we thought it was important to break them out. I think what Hillary can share with you is we also think they're distinct in the sense that they're trying to achieve different goals and they're talking to different audiences. So I think we don't think there's a lot of overlap between these in terms of who's being communicated with and their deployment. But for that deeper discussion, I'll turn the mic over to Hillary.
Briefly, Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you. As Jim said, we did break these out because there are very distinct goals and very distinct audiences here by these different campaigns. As an example, value of transit, they're represented at the bottom. We are in a critical funding year with the renewal of Prop 400 in front of us, and we want to communicate the value of the transit investment that we've made with the existing Prop 400 sales tax. And so with that campaign, we'll be talking to the broader public, the general public about their investment and what that has meant. So a very distinct audience there, different from something like Respect the Ride, which is very centered on security on the light rail system, really speaking to light rail riders about those positive, acceptable behaviors on the system. So very different message there, very different audience there. So looking at this as tiers in terms of audience and messaging. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
I have questions. Sorry, my chair's still. So are these 6 permanent positions or are these temporary positions?
They're not positions at all. They're campaigns.
Outreach campaign.
Yes.
I interpret them as positions. That's why.
Oh, thank you.
So then they're different campaigns that we already have staff.
Yes.
That has the ability to do it. That's where I'm going.
Yes. And we also have contractors already on board, our marketing and advertising contractors, in addition to our staff. So the team is in place to help execute these campaigns.
Is that the RP?
No.
So the budget, correct me if I'm wrong, Hillary, so the budget is for creative.
It's for
ad
creative,
space,
yes.
Things like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Staffing is in place.
Okay, and then it's for outside agencies to also do the creative space.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Councilmember Stipp?
Yes.
I asked one of these this was one of my questions, and I think it was duplicated by others, but
sure thing.
I just got the answers yesterday, so I'm going to reserve the right to ask more questions.
Sure thing.
Between now and the next time we get together.
Sure thing.
The answers that I got were kind of what you had talked about, but I think I want to drive a little bit more specifically about designed outcomes and kind of where we're going. I'm still, after the brief read, I'm still not I don't have my head around that these things are distinctly different. And I really want to know what we have already done, because we have been approving marketing monies for the last year for contract increases, et cetera. So I really want to know how that weaves into this and how this goes from there. So I think that'll kind of be the genesis of my questions, but it's going to take me about the same amount of time as it took you guys to respond to AFS to get us to today. So I'm going to need a little bit more time.
Fair enough.
That's all I wanted to do. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, if there are other things that the board would like to hear more about, we'd be happy to take your questions. I know this is already kind of run a little long, but answering your questions is the most important thing we do.
Yeah.
Jim, I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to ask and I just wanted to clarify one thing. And we were talking about the transit security coordinator, the bus security coordinator.
Yes.
And I know that was a while ago, like one of the first things that you brought up. And one of the things I just wanted to hope that you can address in the future is, like, currently, I know the city of Tempe, we actually pay to have a dedicated PD liaison to really kind of help coordinate and deal with our transit security issues. And I'm sure some of the other cities do also. So tell me how that's going to impact, because obviously that is coming 100% out of our funds, and what that might look like. 'Cause I think Phoenix does the same thing, and I don't know if other cities do. So I feel like we need to just get a little bit more detail in regards to the ripple effect, please.
That is such a great question. I appreciate your asking it. So I'll answer it very briefly, and then we'll try to incorporate into our document more clearly, kind of go forward, because I know, time is of the essence. But Phoenix has made that commitment. Tempe has made that commitment. Other jurisdictions have folks that they have point people for transit. What we're finding is in some circumstances, whether it's those folks or PD in other jurisdictions, when they need to talk to us, whether that's to be able to talk to an operator as a witness or to understand what's going on, sometimes they're just calling customer service because there's nobody on the Valley Metro side to be that good partner with them. So essentially, I think what this issue is intended to do is to create, so Tempe has created a partnership position, but there's no one in Valley Metro for that person to interface with on a dedicated way. So we're trying to create that dedicated interface, both in working with the Phoenix Transit Division, working with your team.
Okay. Hey, and just for the record, just for my preference in the future, and I know you guys have been working really hard, and I know Councilmember Stipp had mentioned the on the fly, how you guys have really changed the dynamics of bringing this new presentation to us. But I would love it if, even if it's late at night or early in the morning, we could get a copy of those slides before the meetings. It'd be really helpful, because then that way all my notes can be together. So it would just, for me anyway, that would be really appreciated.
You bet.
Chair, if I may, Jim, I'd like to have Adrienne talk about the bus security coordinator a little bit. I think that this is such a critical role. It's a gap that we have, and I think it deserves a little bit more thorough explanation about what they do, but specifically how they're going to interact with our member cities, since they're not directly supervising a staff like we are with Allied.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So to clarify a little bit further, and we are definitely aware that primarily with this 3 cities we work with the most, we know obviously Sergeant Trent Luco. So with Tempe PD, but rail really zaps my staff with a lot of the attention is relative to transit. For the bus side of the shop, it's kind of the leftovers from my division. It's whatever time and bandwidth we have left over to really give the attention, and it's really not compensatory with what is deserved. So it's whatever scraps we have left over in my division to really address the bus side of the shop. To develop on what Jim was saying, having a dedicated point of contact for all of the 19 member cities when it comes to bus is what we are severely lacking. I do have a security manager, Don Schneidmiller. He has primarily the role of rail security. That's his primary focus. Again, the leftovers of his time regarding capital projects he's involved in, as well as day-to-day rail security, is what little time he has left over. I actually also answer calls through customer service as best I can when police agencies or the contractor has a question, or a member of the public, when your constituents has a question regarding bus security, when I have time. we do not have the bandwidth to really dive into the bus security side of the shop. So one of the biggest things that will be the big ask for this person is to, like when we did in 2011, 2012, when I was with PD, is to develop a police department liaison group for the bus side of the shop. It involved me actually calling chiefs' offices of then at the time about 18 member cities, aside obviously from Phoenix, and really finding someone to volunteer to be that point of contact, typically as an admin in the chief's office. That's mostly what I got, or a community action officer or sergeant. There was a desired interest when I proposed what the benefit to PD would be, is that cross-jurisdictional kind of communication. I'll give you an example. Of the incidents we have currently happening on the bus side, it is only coming from our contractors. Or by chance, if it is media worthy or a significant serious event, do I get a contact from PD? 95% of the incidents we hear about are from our contractors. So what that means is we don't know what we don't know. We could have a rash of armed robberies at bus stops that we are not aware of because the bus is not there, the operator is unaware, but we have possibly our ridership that are victimized at bus stops that we do not know about. The PD would know about, but do they know what's happening across jurisdictions? If we have this liaison group, as we did in 2011, 2012, we were able to connect those dots very quickly across jurisdictions, and also with that one point of contact with Valley Metro to say, hey, we have this issue, this concern, and be that point of contact. So really, this is a severe lack we have right now in the coordination across the region with security. It's very decentralized, it's fragmented, and it's working kind of in a vacuum. And if we really want to look at it as a system, having this one point of contact to develop that first liaison program, again, that we had several years ago, and really to dive into what our security issues are on our infrastructure as well as our assets, being that dedicated person for our contractors and for security incidents.
Got a question, comment? Vice Mayor?
No, I'm done. Okay. Thank you for that explanation, because that makes sense to me.
Thank you.
And what I mean by that, understanding the two parts and the dynamics that happen on both sides, rail versus bus. And we have more, I would say right now, bus lines across all jurisdictions, and we probably should have really looked at that piece at the same time we started looking at rail. Or at least on our Phoenix side, I believe that's what we were trying to do, because the incidents were going up, and that's when we all rallied around and tried to build what we needed to build on our system. Secondly, you said 2011, 2012. What happened to that position?
That wasn't a position, I'm sorry.
It was just,
Thank you for the question. That wasn't a position. It was when I was the lieutenant with transit. I actually was the one making the phone calls to other peer agencies trying to get that liaison group.
okay, so you created that piece knowing that that was going to help in
Yes, ma'am.
in the communication piece. And I think it's very important also, and I don't know how it will be built, maybe this will go in our contingency area, as to really build a database that's live, that your contractors and then all of PDs at all cities then can interact and then be able to start to see points of where incidents are happening. Because I know working with PD, some of the challenges is the database is not speaking to each other, or the other side just doing it on an Excel sheet and all this other pieces are going. So I would like to look at or recommend for the future as to how do we build that so that all our jurisdictions can communicate on the transit piece, or with Valley Metro. So then I would say we would probably start seeing patterns.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that input, because that's cross-jurisdictional communication, Interpol, those kind of things that you know about. Those have become a challenge for departments. Sometimes we work kind of in our own vacuum, but we know that especially with public transit, people take trips across cities in a blink of an eye. And then you're dealing with the different jurisdictions. So police departments obviously are functional in jurisdiction parameters. They don't function necessarily very well. They have state jurisdiction, but really you're supposed to kind of stay in your jurisdiction. So when we look at sharing information, that definitely has been a challenge. And I see this position, definitely someone that has police experience would be a benefit, an absolutely benefit. That can kind of talk the cop talk, because that's who they're going to be dealing with, but also can be a person who's very vested in developing such a program from the ground up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a robust discussion here that we'll continue having a discussion around this budget and figuring out the details of how do we approve it come June, right? So really great questions, and the board will get the questions soon after this meeting of what's been asked already. Hopefully that will cover some of the lingering questions that maybe folks have. So and you have another budget timeline here? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, just exactly what you were saying, Mr. Chairman. So we'll have another opportunity for this discussion, first with AFS on the 5th and then with the board on the 19th. So we'll continue this discussion. We sure appreciate the questions. Quickly, Representative Tomachov, you asked about the funding for the bus security position. And the answer is it's entirely PTF funded, so city impact at all of adding this position. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jim. All right. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 8, travel expenditures and solicitations. This item is presented for information only. Any other board members have any questions or comments? Hearing none. Item number 9, report on current events and any future agenda items. Any board member?
Well, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say welcome to our new CEO. It's the first board meeting that she's attended with a full board, and how pleased I am that it was a unanimous decision to hire her, and that we're really happy to have her here and to let her know that, you know, she has my full support, you know, with a unanimous decision of the board to select her. There's no doubt that she has the support of the board as we move forward. So welcome, and we're really glad you're here.
Thank you, Director Tomachov.
I think we all echo the same comments here. Thank you, welcome, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Next meeting, it's scheduled for Thursday, May 19th. And we'll move on to our next meeting, Valley Metro RPTA. First item is public comments. Again, address the committee on non-agenda items and all action items. Folks have 3 minutes, and I'll call Mr. Blue Crowley. Go ahead, Blue.
One of the items that you're going to be agreeing to later is the minutes on last month's meeting. And if you had looked in them, I did make some comments on the service changes and lack of stuff in the area. One of them would be this document here that I'm still trying to find out what you substituted it for. This is the regional transit plan from 206 to 226. And it had a super grid of different services. And according to your past CEO, he said that when the recession happened, all of this got toilet. Because I've been asking, where are your benchmarks for this? And I look at things in it like in 2018, you were to do Bell Road from the 303 to Frank Light Boulevard. There are about 7 in here that go all the way to, or 1, 2, 3. There are 7 in here that go all the way to Litchfield. In fact, for 2023, it says in here, you're going to do a Litchfield bus. But what I see in your planning is ineptitude with the service changes and such. You guys all have, you know, Phoenix, Tempe, Glendale, Mesa. You all have spring training. Wouldn't it be nice to have the routes going to spring training on the time that they're there? Well, if that were to be the case with the service changes you're doing now, You would have had to have that in there. And do any of you have anything going to your spring training? No, because you didn't plan. You don't plan. And that would have been including Surprise if there would have been a Bell Road bus. It does include Glendale with the Glendale bus. It does include Tempe with the 30. Oh, and the 30 is getting some changes. Wouldn't it be nice that you guys were forward thinking enough to put that in there, that during spring training, that those bus routes and changes would be going by there? But do you do that? No. Now, is it from a lack of information? Look at that minutes. I brought these things up how many times? And every year when you're doing service changes, I have asked, where are these? So where are the benchmarks that you should have been doing from 209? Because I look at Indian School, Litchfield to Granite, that would have been in 19. Litchfield to Curry, Van Buren, that would have been in 19. 99th Avenue, Buckeye to Bell Road. That's Phoenix, that's Glendale, that's Peoria. Where are you doing the job and how are you doing it? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Blue. Item number 2 on the agenda is the consent agenda presented for action. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda? If not, request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
So move.
I forgot to ask for that document that you guys are going to get in from.
So move.
Mayor Harkey,
Second.
Councilmember Tomachoff, all in favor say aye.
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 Any nays? Ayes have it. Motion passes. Item number 3, proposed October 2022 service changes. Any questions or comments on the information presented? Again, this is for information only. Item number 4, report on current events. Any current events or future agenda items? Hearing none. And item number 5, next meeting, again, May 19th. Thank you, everybody. We'll wait one more minute to start our Valley Metro Rail meeting. Thank you, everybody. All right, I think we have everybody here for Valley Metro Rail. We'll start, or who is? Oh, okay.
Let's just talk about
Yeah. I think we can get started here. So item number 1 on the Valley Metro Rail meeting is public comments. Mr. Bruce Crowley here. Go ahead, Bruce.
Well, let's talk about the ineptitude of planning by rail. Are you a multimodal system? Well, on your extension going to, what is it called? The CAPAX LAP, going from 2nd Avenue all the way to the Capitol. How multimodal are you there? Well, with your little diagrams, those little circles and such, and this is from 21, it doesn't show that the areas of concern are the bus stops. And how many stops are you going to be putting in there? Well, it's so much easier to put them in before you have to re-put them in. Now, are you going to be multimodal? Well, you're the rail people. Where are those stops? Because when you put the lineage in there, you're doing that for what? Oh, yourselves. Because in your mind, you are primary, and that's the way it's going to be. But like I said, where are the stops? 5 friggin' routes, and you don't have stops along there. But we're going to build it. but are you going to be multimodal? Well, why should you be? I have a document here that I'll be showing your CEO that it says currently adopted regional high capacity transit. Glendale, you said nobody's bringing rail into downtown, but that's the agreed upon thing it says here. And Phoenix, the Paradise Valley extension, and it says we're doing that into 40. How much have you abandoned right-of-way that was supposed to be there for them? We're talking multi-million-dollar facilities that were 24th Street and Camelback, and you abandon it. You are not going to be doing that. So when you put out documentation saying this is what we're doing, since those things have been abandoned, it doesn't mean it's the agreed upon, it means it's the one that's rejected. And as I said, when I look at this, and this is what was presented from the city of Phoenix to the populace, each one of those spots doesn't go on a bus route. When you put the line in, you need to have it being multimodal. And how hard is it to do that? Oh, it means that you're planning to do it. And you aren't even planning to fix it yet. Please, get off the pot and get the job done.
Thank you. Move on to item number 2, consent agenda. Consent agenda is presented for action. We do have item 2B that is being pulled from today's agenda and will be brought back for consideration at a future meeting. You want to talk about it?
Oh, no.
Or
Do we
mention it
just-
or no?
No.
All right, perfect. Do ask any questions or comments on the consent agenda. Hearing none, request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda items 2A, 2C, 2D, and 2E.
Second.
All right. Seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Hearing none. Item number 3, report on current events. Any events? Hearing none. Next meeting, Thursday, May 19th. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.